As we've journeyed through Mark, there's been lots of kind of questions about who Jesus is, and what we find is that word is getting out and about who he is. And some are getting to the point where they've said, truly you are the Son of God. They're getting it. They're seeing Jesus for who he is. They're coming to know him. They're having their lives changed by him. As we recently spoke of the disciples in the boat as he walks on the water at his eye, do not be afraid. And if we dipped into Matthew, we find them saying, truly you are the Son of God. All those that ate of the food with the 5 loaves and 2 fishes, the feeding of 5,000, they were ready, it says, to make Jesus king. And that wasn't Jesus' plan. He didn't come to have an earthly kingdom. He came to bring heaven down. And so he continues his ministry. And today we find a group of religious people sent from Jerusalem to kind of entrap him, to find out what he's teaching, to kind of work towards bringing an end to his ministry so they can be sent stage once again. And I got a question this morning. I wonder if we as children or as parents have experienced this. Have you ever been sat watching the TV and or playing a game, and all of a sudden mum or dad calls you to come and help with the chores? Yeah? And all of a sudden, in that split second, it's like, I got homework. Have you ever experienced that? Yeah, happy watching TV, playing games, and then there's a chore, and all of a sudden, doing your homework proves more important or better or easier than doing the chores, and it becomes convenient. And we find in this story that Jesus has a bit of a conversation with these guys because they come to challenge him. And how many of you know if you start an argument with God, you ain't gonna win? Right? He knows all things. He sees all things. He knows your heart. He knows what we're thinking before he even comes into our minds. And we see that in this story. So Jesus, in Mark 7, verse 1 to 23, we find that Jesus is with his disciples. And these Pharisees and teachers of the law come from Jerusalem and gather around Jesus. And they saw, right, some of the disciples eating food without washing their hands. Right? Now, before you get too excited, if you don't like washing your hands, right? This isn't Jesus giving you permission to not wash your hands, right? There's something bigger that's going on here. But they spot that the disciples are eating without washing their hands. And of all the things that they could ask Jesus about his teaching and his mission and what he was doing, his miracles, they say, how come your disciples are eating food without washing their hands? I mean, I've got to say, I hope none of us eat food without washing our hands after being to the toilet or anything. I know when you're out and about, you might be sat on a beach and there's no way to wash your hands or whatever, but, I trust that we wash our hands regularly. We learned how to do it properly in COVID, didn't we? How many of you still sing happy birthday while washing your hands? I got to say, I can't say I did it at the start. I just wash your hands. Happy birthday's kept for special occasions like in it. But they challenged them, why are they eating without washing their hands? And the interesting thing here is that these religious leaders, they had a thing, see, that they wouldn't wash their hands, they wouldn't eat without washing their hands, not because of the reasons maybe you and I would use, but because they wondered if they'd made contact with a Gentile in the market. Right? And this was their idea. If they'd touched someone unclean in the market, that they would... And so it was a religious thing for them. And seeing the disciples not washing their hands was like red rag to a bull. And they challenged Jesus over it. Of all the questions they could ask. And Jesus, right? How many of you... We've had a bit of a... was it recently in youth, as we so often speak of God loving us, of him being gentle and mild, And we recently had a passage on a Friday night where the disciples goes, I've never thought of Jesus speaking in that kind of way. And he does it right here. Because he cuts to the chase. Because he knows their thought. He knows where they're coming from. He knows what they have that do and don't do. And he calls them hypocrites. And he quotes a passage from Isaiah chapter 29 and verse 13. It says that these people, they honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. And Jesus wasn't saying that washing hands is important. What he was saying that knowing God and having a clean heart was more important. And these men had their priorities all wrong. And so he's challenging them. And in fact, it goes a little bit deeper. Remember I asked at the beginning, how many of you have been watching the telly and you get asked to do chores and all of a sudden you've got homework that you need to do to get out of doing the chores? Well, something that these religious people did was they had something called korban. Maybe say a little bit more about it, but just to give you the idea, because if you read the passage, that's what Jesus is speaking about. And what they did was if they had parents that were in need or elderly, right, then what they would do is they would tie themselves up with things, busying themselves in the synagogue and giving their money to the synagogue or to the work that made them look good. And all of a sudden they had a good reputation, right? To get them out of looking after their parents. But how many of us know that God puts a special value on family and on mums and dads caring for children and children caring for their mums and dads, particularly in the later parts of life? That was part of living in a way to honor God. And he's going, you are making yourselves look good. You wash your hands, yes, but your hearts, they're far from me. And he throws that challenge to them. And you know what? We can maybe do things that make us feel like we look good. But the question is, where's our hearts when it comes to Jesus? And he continues, he says, because, do you know what? Nothing outside a person can defile a person. Anything you touch, anything you eat, it doesn't defile you, but it's what comes out of a person that defiles you. Out of the heart, the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And so it's what we fill our hearts with rather than what we fill our bellies with. It's about what the harmful things that we watch and see and read and do that harms us, that makes us unclean. Not the food or eating without washing hands, as important as that is. A clean heart is more important. The disciples, as they come away, they hear that and they go, Jesus, what do you mean by that? You know, because it would have been ingrained into them about, the importance of washing hands, even though they'd had a bit of a lapse that day. And Jesus says, are you so dull? You know, I think sometimes, I mean, don't get me wrong, God is love, and he loves us, and we're precious to him. But sometimes I think God looks at us and he goes, are you really that dumb? Come on. Will you just listen? Will you pay attention? Will you get my heart in what I'm saying? He says, don't you see that nothing that enters a person from the outside can defile them? For it doesn't go into the heart, but into their stomach and then out of the body. He went on, what comes out of a person is what defiles them. For it is from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts and theft and murder and adultery and greed and he lists off a whole load of evil things. And as we said on Friday, evil's a very real thing, and there's far too much of it in our world, and Jesus came to bring light and into our lives, and that we might shine his light into the wider world and make a difference. And so, yes, wash your hands, but more importantly, let's make sure that our heart is clean, that we do things for the right reason, because what's in our hearts affects what we do and what we say. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. You've had a bad day, and you've allowed your heart to be filled with all the bad things, and what comes out at the end of the day? What a day. Yeah? But when we through that know God, and that's what we were saying on Friday, that the Lord is my light and my salvation. He is the stronghold of my life, that when all the darkness bombards us, that his light lifts us, helps us, strengthens us, allows us to stand however dark the situation can be. So Jesus wants us to allow him to fill our hearts and keep our hearts clean, living for him. And we read in Philippians 4, verse 4 to 9, it says, rejoice in the Lord always. Yeah, not just on the good days. Rejoice in the Lord always, on the bad days too. I'll say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. He cares about every situation. And if it's dark, then we can talk to him about it. And that's what we'll be doing on Tuesday. Not too young, not too old. We'll gather to talk to God about the darkness in our world. And we'll lift up his name, the light of the world. And he says, and the peace of God, which transcends, which beyond all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. He comes to help us guard our hearts, that what comes out of us might show God for who he is. And he says, finally, as I round off my letter, Paul says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about these things. Whatever you've learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. And so it's a key for all of us, particularly the younger ones, as we're bombarded with Halloween stuff. And, there's the fun is painted to be harmless fun. But the Bible speaks of the danger and darkness of such evil practices and tells us to have nothing to do with witchcraft. And so, if given the choice, is any of it true, noble, right, pure? Does it tick all those boxes? Then let's not have anything to do with it, but make our lives about Jesus, as we've sung this morning. Yeah, it's all about you. And so there's let's start it off with David. It says, God said of him, he's a man after my own heart. And as we read through the Psalms, we read verses where it says, create in me a clean heart, O God. Search me and see if there's any wicked way in me, and lead me in your way everlasting. And that's where we want to live out our lives. And I encourage you that the younger you start, the better life will be.